Hi, I'm Jess, part-time Hobbit, and I'm here to talk to you about Tolkien. This week, we're getting to an episode of this series that I am so excited for, and that is the Elven costumes. Peter Jackson's Elves captured my childhood imagination in a vice grip. I remember seeing Arwen and immediately going, I want to be her when I grow up. Although I turned out to be a bit more of a hobbit than my childhood self may have liked, the elves' costume design is masterful. I'm going to go through each of the three groups of elves that are presented to us in the films and discuss some of their most iconic looks. For time's sake, I can't discuss every single outfit that we see, but I am sure that I'll get to the rest of them in a later video. For now, let's talk about Tolkien's descriptions of the elves and the designer's overall unifying design for the elven race. As always, Tolkien doesn't really describe specific elements of clothing. He mentions color and sometimes basic structure such as gowns, caps, or belts, but he doesn't really get into the nitty-gritty, preferring to dwell in the realm of vibes. Neela Dixon, Richard Taylor, and Peter Jackson, the minds behind the basic design of Middle-earth, had to look elsewhere in Tolkien's work for inspiration. And where better to look than Tolkien's own illustrations. Not his illustrations of the elves, of course, since, as a rule, Tolkien generally avoided drawing people. Rather, they decided to draw on the style of Tolkien's art as a whole. Around the turn of the century, Art Nouveau was rapidly rising to prominence, particularly in Europe. It rose as a backlash against the more rigid art styles that had come before it, and featured elements of the natural world. Art Nouveau is characterized by sinuous, curling shapes, and the style clearly imprinted itself upon Tolkien's mind. His art often features nature, and its stylized lines often resemble that of Art Nouveau. Due to these similarities of style, the trilogy's design team drew from elements of Art Nouveau for the architecture and costuming of the elves. The look is characterized by swirling designs and rich detail, looking like it was straight out of an Art Nouveau design book. The signature silhouette of the elves is also reminiscent of the tail end of the Art Nouveau period, the 1920s, where draping, shapeless garments rose to prominence. Dixon utilized this hanging silhouette to allow the elves to look like they were simply floating through the landscape. The designers pulled from a relatively niche design aesthetic and fashion, a highly effective choice that allowed the elves to appear unlike any of the other races that we see in Middle-earth. They are very obviously from a completely different place and a completely different time. This aesthetic is powerfully present in Lothlorien, particularly in Galadriel, who the costume designer Neela Dixon referred to as the ultimate elf. Galadriel is necessarily in all white, but Dixon saw this as a feature of the costume, not a limitation. Her look is incredibly simple, a draped white gown, and Dixon left her without any jewelry besides what is essential for the plot. This draws all of the attention to the essential details: her ring, her golden hair, and her piercing blue eyes. To avoid it appearing plain, Dixon constructed Galadriel's gown out of intensely beaded fabrics that catch the shifting light magnificently. The movement of the dress and the beautiful fabric highlight the ethereal nature of the character, without being flashy enough to pull attention away from Cate Blanchett's performance. The costumes of Rivendell are similar to those of Lothlorien, but they are certainly not the same. Dixon retains the lines and shapes of Lothlorien, but adds in much more rich color. More so than Lothlorien, the elves of Rivendell have immersed themselves in the culture of Middle-earth, and it's reflected in deep, earthy tones and luxurious velvet fabrics. These different details mean that the audience is immediately able to clock a difference between Rivendell and Lothlorien. Arwen epitomizes this grounded grace, and although she has so many absolutely gorgeous gowns, we are going to look at the iconic dress described by the designer as the dying frock. In sharp contrast to Galadriel's unearthly white, Arwen's dress is dark and brooding. It hangs off her form with a similar grace to Galadriel's, it has a similar neckline, and even similar draped sleeves. The fabric, though, is a rich, midnight blue velvet, which was custom dyed for the costume. There is hand beading and embroidery around her neckline and upper arms, and the material has been heavily overdyed, giving it a sense of age and careful care. The dark colors contrast her pale skin beautifully and highlight every single move she makes. The scene takes place at the crux of Arwen's dramatic arc, as her immortality is leaving her, and the drama of the gown reflects this arc. It's also a contrast to Galadriel's white, which shows her slowly moving away from the ways of her people and her heritage. It is a gown that tells her story, but still remains firmly set in the language of the other costumes that we've seen. The theme of the elves' costumes was upheld, even when the designer had to move away from frocks and gowns. I imagine it must have been quite a struggle to clothe the male elves. Their style is somewhat androgynous, but I don't think Hugo Weaving could rock a dress quite like Liv Tyler does. Elrond's costume delicately walks the line between masculinity and femininity while maintaining the design aesthetic of the elven costumes that we've seen thus far. Rather than low, swooping necklines, his is high and smooth, usually a Mandarin-style collar. He still has huge, draping sleeves, elvish embroidery, and a costume that hangs off of his shoulders, allowing him to have that graceful floating movement that's signature to the elves. Elrond is regal and masculine as a king, but still maintains the grace and movement of the elves. Thranduil, who is infused with the very distinct design aesthetic of Mirkwood, takes the opposite approach to the elven lord. Elrond stands tall and elegant, whereas Thranduil lounges like a heathen king of old, while still maintaining the grace of an elf. Designers used this image of Tom Ford as the inspiration for Thranduil's slumped elegance, and they opened up the collar of his costume, allowing it to hang off of him no matter how he is postured. Tolkien barely describes Thranduil outside of his dangerous-looking crown, but the designers took this one detail to heart. Thranduil's crown is practically hostile, made from an artfully tangled mass of roots and thorns. If you were standing too close and he turned his head a little too fast, it looks like you would lose an eye, and Thranduil wouldn't really care. He perfectly encompasses the art of elegant, effortless luxury. Thranduil's costume does cling onto some simplicity, not relying on gaudy jewelry or hairpieces. Lee Pace didn't want his eyebrows to be touched at all during the filming, so they remain strong and proud, untamed in an otherwise meticulously manicured appearance. His hair is strikingly long and bright and doesn't need to be held in place with any braids. It simply stays there because he's king. Thranduil is at odds with the rest of his kingdom, though. The elves of Mirkwood are a totally different type of elf than any of the elves we've looked at today. When the elves were first called out of their ancestral homeland to see the light of the trees of Valinor and gain enlightenment, some chose to stay behind. They were considered to be less noble and wise, and were in love with the world, rather than focusing on their final resting place. Thranduil was not one of these elves, but rather was just set to govern over them, hence how different his and Legolas's hair is to the rest of the Mirkwood elves. In Tolkien's writing, these elves are mostly faceless, but since they were going to be put in the film, Peter Jackson decided to put a face to these elves. The result of this was Tauriel. Now, I'll have a full video addressing her character at some point, so this isn't really the place to have the debate over whether or not she is a good character, but she is still a fascinating extension of the elves' design aesthetic. Since she didn't have any basis in the book, Tauriel's character went through many design phases. One of the first things that was settled on is something called leaf mail, which Richard Taylor first saw at a wearable arts competition. It was created by a New Zealand artist who was then brought onto the Weta team to help integrate this technology into Tauriel's costume. Leaf mail was highly flexible and fluid, and the designers thought that it would be a perfect way to have Tauriel in armor while still maintaining some of the signature drape and movement of the elves. The initial testing went well, but later on the idea had to be scrapped. Especially in the film industry, few things are predictable, and once they had the costume on Tauriel's actress, Evangeline Lilly, it became clear that the original armor design simply wasn't going to work for the actress. Instead, Tauriel is in a coat of tree bark fabric with shifting, layered material underneath. This was able to maintain some of the movement of the elves, whilst integrating a completely new design. Tauriel's hairstyling is a striking combination of the length and lusciousness of Arwen's locks and the delicate braiding of Legolas's. Tauriel exists as a fascinating attempt to make a character that is as graceful and noble as her more lore-relevant counterparts, while integrating a new design aesthetic that is still in tune with the previously established aesthetic of Middle-earth. There are a lot of elves in these movies, and as we have established, a lot of different costumes. But I think that the elves really speak to the way that a unified design can aid in world building. No one is going to confuse an elf with a hobbit, or even an elf with a human. They have a style outside of anything that we see in Middle-earth. The common design language allowed Neela Dixon and her team to create different characters and different looks while never straying from the unified design vision that they had established. Modern movies, and especially TV shows, could definitely take a page from this book. Having a set design aesthetic for a group of people in your world isn't limiting. It's making sure that all of the puzzle pieces that you are working with came from the same box before you start mashing them together. In the end, you get costumes that are cohesive, but still unique and illustrative of the character that is wearing them. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Make sure you leave a like if you learned anything new. Let me know which of the elven costumes is your favorite in the comments, and make sure you subscribe so that you never miss another one of my videos. The link to my Ko-fi virtual tip jar is right in the description if you want to make any donations to the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope that you all have a very happy, hobbity day.